Good evening. Welcome to Creating Learner Profiles with Schoolnet Data. This is Pam Batchelor from Digital Teaching and Learning at the Department of Public Instruction. And I'm glad to have you all tonight. With me tonight, joining us is my colleague, Donna Murray. Donna, you want to say hello?
Yeah, hi there. Yes, good evening, everybody. I'm Donna Murray, Pam's colleague in Digital Teaching and Learning, and I'm just helping facilitate in the background. So if you have questions, please put those questions in the chat, and I mean in the questions box, and I will help facilitate that and shoot those questions towards Pam so that she can help answer.
Thank you, Donna. We appreciate you joining in. So we do have a presentation tonight that you're going to want, and you can get it one of two ways. If you look in the handout section of GoToWebinar, there is a PDF copy of the slide deck that you can download and access that way, or you can go into the chat and click on the link that I just put in the chat, or you can just type it from the bit.ly that's on your screen. So we're going to give everyone just a minute to get that presentation pulled up, and then we'll get started. And by the way, this webinar is being recorded, so that way you will have a recording to refer back to when I send you an email with your CEU certificate. You will have the recording to be able to play back. All right, so tonight we are talking about learner profiles and digging into Schoolnet data. So we're going to be talking about both as a teacher, how you can dig into the data in Schoolnet, as well as how students can look at the data that's in Schoolnet. So we have a full agenda for tonight. We're going to be talking about what is a learner profile, looking at some example learner profiles, looking at the data, of course, in Schoolnet, really digging into the different types of data that's available, looking at some ideas for how you can implement learner profiles and using the data in Schoolnet, and then, of course, sharing some resources. So I do have a couple of questions just to ask and get to see who is in the room. All right. So first of all, we're going to start with a quick poll to see who is joining us virtually tonight. So I'll leave this poll open for about 5 more seconds. And that is very helpful to see. We have mostly classroom teachers with us tonight, as well as some district level support staff and a few school administrators. So thank you. And then another question is, have you created learner profiles before? And that's just to help me kind of understand where we are tonight, if we are exploring, or, you know, if this is something you already do. I'm going to leave this open for about 5 more seconds. All right, so it looks like for most of us, we are exploring a brand new concept, which is great. I love that. Thank you for taking time out of your day to spend time with us and explore something new. And then one last question, and then this is just, how often do you use Schoolnet? Just so that way we have an idea. All right. So it looks like we have some users that are pretty frequent, and then we have some new users as well. So a good little mix. So thank you for that. So we are going to go back and just cover a few little basics here. If you have any questions at any point in time, please use the questions feature to answer your questions. So you will get a certificate via email from me within 5 business days for your participation tonight. Along with that, I will include a copy of the slide deck and a link to the recording. The credit on the certificate is recommended for digital learning competency credit. However, you do need to follow your local process in your public school unit to get submitted for that credit and include any type of justification for the type of credit that you are requesting. So any type of artifacts, screenshots of anything you're doing in Schoolnet to support that digital learning competency credit. All right, so please be patient with me and let me have those 5 business days. It's not an automated process to generate the certificates. I wish it was. So just be a little patient with me and I will get those out to your email address that you used to register tonight. So if you happen to use your personal email, just make sure that you're checking your personal email, because that will be whatever email address you registered for the webinar, that will be the email address I send the certificate to. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about what is a learner profile. So there is a link on this slide here to a little bit more detailed explanation about a learner profile. But for our purposes tonight, we're just kind of be exploring this idea. And so a learner profile contains multiple categories of information about a learner. And it can include some or all of the following: basic kind of demographic, who are you information, some ideas about maybe the social emotional challenges and preferences that the student has, some current performance evaluation data, so where they are right now academically, and then of course maybe some goals and interests, both personally and academically. So all of this information kind of creates this snapshot of the learners that are in your classroom. And FYI, you can have a learner profile for yourself too as an adult learner. You'll see an example of one of those in just a minute. So it definitely, a learner is anybody, right? A learner is our students, a learner is ourselves. Hopefully, we are all lifelong learners, learning something new tonight, exploring Schoolnet. So I'm glad to have you with me. And so I do have 3 examples of a learner profile. So on this slide, we're just going to look at each one of these links. So that first sample learner profile, probably something pretty familiar to us if you've got any type of data wall or data notebooks that you keep on your students. Kind of has those, beginning of the year kind of goals, grades, kind of a personal profile about who you are, some academic things. What does this learner like about school? What they like about school? And then of course some academic data. And I like this because it's from the student's perspective, so how can you get help? What do you think is affecting your grades? What can you do to improve in your areas of growth? And then this particular learner profile, this school uses the NEWA MAP assessments. So they have a little section about MAP. And then they have some questions about personalized learning. So what are some strengths? What are they enjoying about personalized learning at their school? And then some social emotional things. And then finally some goals. So, all of this information, collected from a student, as well as, some basic background information that the teacher filled in. The next example is actually a blank example, but there's a few things about this example I really like, and I also really like that this is a Google Doc that you can go under that file and make a copy. So if you want to explore more about learner profiles and maybe try one out with some of your learners, you could certainly use this example as a starting point. So it just has some basic information at the top. Again, this also has spots for that NEWA or MAP data. So Depending on what you're using in your public school unit, you might could change that out for whatever benchmark or maybe NC check-ins. You could definitely do that. Language data, so if this was for an EL student, that you could put that in there. But I really like their learning preferences on this learner profile and how they frame it around the universal design for learning, which has multiple means of access, engagement, and expression, right? So how different ways that students could access information or the content, how do they engage in that content? And then how do they express their knowledge or their competency of those standards, right? So I really like how this learner profile kind of frames it within those UDL principles that are so good act as a great way for personalization, because it's giving that opportunities for students to access, engage, and express in multiple means. All right, and then there's some space for interests, learning strengths, challenges, and then it has, this particular section is relevant to the school. So I was thinking if your school has some school improvement plan goals, or, something along the lines for your grade level, you could sit here and edit this to make it more personal for your school and situation. And then lastly, this is from Dallas ISD, and if you are looking for some examples for personalized learning, Dallas ISD has been a leader in sharing personalized learning and information about it. So they have these great examples on their website about personalized learning, and they have these examples of learner profiles. And so these are very in-depth. I'll just go ahead and tell you, this is a very in-depth, and they also apply the design thinking model. So they have some things in here that you'll see that relate to that design thinking iteration cycle. So just, don't think that if this is, most of us said tonight that this is a completely new concept. Don't think that you have to sit here and basically, write a short story about each one of your learners. This is just shared as an example of, what it could look like. So, I like this example because thinking about, if you were to do one of these for your staff, think about how easy it would be to get to know each other, and working on a team collaboratively, to be able to see what people's interests are, what their working styles are. I just thought they had some really nice questions on these learner profiles. And so you'll see a little bit more about that design cycle that they follow throughout these examples. So that way you can see, and they actually, I think Dallas ISD got a big grant to fund a lot of their design thinking. So a very in-depth example. If you would like to study it more, I'm sure you'll find some good bits and pieces to kind of bring out from this. But basically, I like their little snapshot at the beginning here that a learner profile tells an individual's academic and personal story over time and helps to establish that coaching relationship, right? So in thinking about a learner profile, how can we, tell that story, and how can we, of course, use that information to establish a relationship, right? Because it's great if you know every single thing about your students, but if you can't use that information in a way to kind of, build that relationship around their learning and where their goals are, then that's the most important part. Is not how much you know, but how much of that information you can use to facilitate that relationship. Um, so and just to let you know, if you've never been to learningaccelerator.org, they have some really great examples of high quality teaching and learning. And I like the fact that they can separate it out by grade bands, so that way you can see examples that are very relevant to the learners that you have. So, if you are an elementary school teacher, then, your learner profile is going to be pretty is going to be a lot more basic than some of these in-depth ones, just based on the students, abilities, and also, where they are with giving feedback. You can even, in K2, I've seen learner profiles that are smiley faces and scales of 1 to 5. So that way, it doesn't require as much, writing from a student. So there's definitely, and reading. So there's definitely examples at every age and grade level. All right, so have a couple of questions. I'm going to pause for those. And Melissa asked about, do most learner profiles incorporate students' perception of their learning? And I would say yes. So there is a student agency part of a learner profile. It's not just us as educators kind of making these snapshots of students, but it's also, getting their perspectives on, how they feel about school and what their academic and personal interests and goals are. And then Madeline was asking, how can this be beneficial for a middle school elective teacher? So a middle school, elective teacher, you have the blessing of being able to teach everybody, and you also have that curse of being able to teach everybody. So I'm thinking that learner profiles for you would be an excellent way to kind of establish those relationships, because and then also being able to have them to go back on and draw back on when you have that student at a certain point. But I know there's a lot of different ways that middle schools do scheduling, so I'm not sure, if you have the same group of students for, a certain chunk of time or a whole semester, and then you have a new group, but I'm thinking, or an A day and B day, but I'm thinking that those learner profiles can really be a way for you to get to know your students in a way that may not be possible just based on your rotation and how frequently you see so many students. I also think a learner profile can be a good way to collaborate when it's needed, because a lot of times, from a perspective of, at one point in time, I was the only 7th grade social studies teacher in my school. So I saw every 7th grade student, and my PLC was the PLC of me. So I can kind of relate to that element, to that elective mindset, because a lot of times you don't have anybody else that may teach the same class that you do, and you have the ability of seeing all of those students. So learner profiles would be a way to gather that information about the student, to be able to kind of build some deeper relationships, as well as be able to collaborate with some of the other teachers. If you need to, for parent conferences or other things like that, you would be able to use that information to build. And honestly, depending on what your subject area is, you can even use a learner profile as kind of like the start of an interactive notebook that maybe the students would keep in your course, depending on what their interests are, and tailoring those interests to the standards that you teach, because I think elective areas have a little bit more flexibility in what they teach and how they teach it. So we always have our standards, but how we teach them could definitely be influenced by a learner profile. All right. Any other questions so far? If not, just check out that Learning Accelerator when you have a chance. There's a lot of great articles and videos and things on there. So now we're really going to dig into Schoolnet. So we have an idea of what a learner profile is, right? So how do we build them, or how do we start them anyway? There's a lot of information in Schoolnet. I like Schoolnet because it has all the information that PowerSchool has, but it kind of puts it in a more user-friendly way for me as a teacher. So in thinking about building these learner profiles and getting that basic, academic information in before the students, kind of have their say, and, putting in their perspectives and their goals. being able to see exactly where a student is academically, where they've been, all in one place. So I have some screenshots in the next few slides, but I'm actually going to go into the training site. And you are welcome to follow along with me. If you want to, you can either just watch the screen, or you can actually go into your production site of Schoolnet if you log into the NC Ed Cloud and click on the little red house for Schoolnet. But I'm going to use the training site because we have data that I can show. So, all right. So when your screen loads in Schoolnet, the first thing I'm going to show you is the student profile. And this particularly can be very helpful for those elective and enhancement areas because it's a quick place to get all the information about a student. And there's a few different ways that you can get to them. So you can come over here to the left side and you can go under reporting, and the reporting dashboard links to the student profiles. But the easiest way that I think is to just scroll down on the home page until you get to the classroom profile. And then when you see your list of students' names, anything that's blue in Schoolnet is a link. So we can click on a student and it will bring up their information, right? All right. So looking at this student's profile, I can see their basic demographic information. I can also see the current enrollment and any absences they have so far for this year. So everything in Schoolnet is synced to PowerSchool every night. There's a sync, except for this attendance data. Attendance data is synced on Saturdays. So you will see it update on Saturdays. So you have students that are absent this week, you'll see that after Saturday's sync with PowerSchool. You can also see the student's current academic record, and then any progress that they've done on any benchmark tests done at the district level. So that's what's kind of on this first tab. The next tab has their standardized tests, right? So I can see their scores from their most recent EOC or EOG. I will note that this coming weekend, is a maintenance weekend, and the EOG and EOC scores from last year are going to be loaded into Schoolnet. So very excited about that because that'll be another good recent data point for you to have in here. But I can actually go into show filters and I can change back to prior years, right? So if I wanted to see how the student did the year prior, I can continue to go back. And now, I'm all the way back into elementary school for this particular student. Discipline incidents, you will only see that if you are a leadership level at a school. So for the school administrators that are with us tonight, you should see disciplinary information in here if there's any for that particular student. I think one of the most powerful sections for the student profile is this enrollment and academic record, right? So I can go back and see how this particular student has, what schools they've been attended to, have they gone to the same schools, have they been going to different schools, how many absences they've had each year. All this information is available to me, and then if I keep scrolling down, I'll actually see their academic record, right? So I can scroll down and I can see about the last 5 years worth of academic grades that this student has had, which has been how long since we've been using Schoolnet. So you can go back and see all of this information. So Melissa, that's correct. Teachers cannot see discipline data for their own students. Discipline data is only for administrators or folks with a leadership role in Schoolnet. All right, and then we have a program tab. So the program tab is for any EL or AIG data. We do not have EC data in Schoolnet. So if the student was an English learner or was marked for intellectual action, academically gifted, you would see that information here. The next two tabs show me the students' benchmark tests and classroom tests that they've taken at Schoolnet. And again, this is for all subject areas. So any test they've taken in Schoolnet, I would be able to see. So this is really powerful information for thinking about that learner profile and where they are academically. You would be able to see the information from all the subject areas, right? So if your district does not use Schoolnet for very extensively, or school doesn't use Schoolnet very extensively, there may not be a lot of data here. In this particular example, this student has taken quite a few tests in different areas, and so I'd be able to see that information. So thinking about exporting data, we do have the features here on every page that you could create a PDF. So just depending on how you want to set up a learner profile, you absolutely could export this data into a student's learner profile. I think it would be the easiest if you do some kind of like a learner notebook or a dated notebook that students kind of can keep up and track. You could very easily just create a PDF and bring that in. There are also some reports that I'm going to show you that you can export as a Excel sheet. So there's that option as well. So the next space is this learning plan and teacher's notes. And so this space is just for teachers of a student. And I think it's probably one of the ways that a learner profile could honestly be useful from year to year for a student is if there's a place for student strengths and opportunities, as well as for interventions that have been applied. So this information is not public to a student. A student can't see what's been put on their learning plan and teacher's notes. Only other teachers of that student, and of course your school leadership would be able to see that as well. But it is cumulative and goes from year to year. So I would be able to go back and see what maybe worked for this student last year and what opportunities were or remediations were posted. So that is a good space that's not very well utilized in Schoolnet. But hopefully that gives you a good idea. All right, any other questions about learner profiles? And the student profile before we move on. So the benchmark tab only pulls assessments that are in the district or school level test category. So if a PLT makes a common test every quarter, if they're not making it as a school level test, if they're like sharing it through co-authoring as like a My Classroom test, then it would show up under that classroom test tab. The only things that come with this benchmarks are school level or district level benchmarks. So it just depends on the test category that they use. All right, so I'm going to go back to the homepage and we're going to look at some reports kind of based on standards performance, because I think that also very much ties into the learner profile. So basically, the first thing is just thinking about your learner profile and how it can be formatted. And you could certainly, kind of use that student profile from Schoolnet. I've seen folks actually just kind of export the PDFs of pages and then they look at some test data for current academic performance as well. So going through here, we have on this classroom assessment monitor, we have some district and classroom tests that this teacher has given. And we can go in through and go into our standards analysis report that Schoolnet gives us. And, this is one of the pre-formatted reports that Schoolnet automatically generates. whenever we have a test in Schoolnet that we provide. You'll see a bar graph, with each standard. And then if we go down, we start to see our individual students, right? So we can see how they perform by standard. But if you actually click on a student's name, it kind of brings up this individualized report based on their performance, right? So if we go down here, we can see the different standards that the student has been evaluated on. And if I click on it, notice it actually gives me weak standards and strong standards, right? Oops. So I could go into these standards and see how the student is performing. And right away, that kind of gives me that, hey, where are some things the student needs to work on? And then another thing that we can look at, if I go back to the home page and I'm going to go back into my reports and I'm going to look at standards mastery, that is also available as kind of an individual look as well. So let me go over in the standards mastery tab. In this report, if I click on any of the blue links, that's a student. So let me go look at this particular student, and it actually pulls up an item analysis by standard, right? So I can see the standards, I can see, how they scored, and I can see also the questions as well, right? And then I can click up here where it says show benchmark tests only. Maybe I want to see all tests. It'll show me all tests for that particular standard. So a few different ways of looking at your data to look at. And then an item analysis is also a real powerful report too for students, because that's going to look kind of item by item at a test as well as to standards. So this always takes a minute to load the item analysis report, especially because I'm in the training site. So keep those questions coming. Some great questions tonight. All right. This looks like my page loaded. So here I have, I like to sort right here on the item analysis. You can sort by your percent correct. So I like to do that to make sure I'm looking at the standards that are the questions that have the lowest percentage. You can also sort my answer choices as well for any of the items, right? So if I was, looking at this one particular student, I can see what their total score is. I can see what their question responses are for each answer. And then if I go into I think it was a benchmark test, notice that there's a filter by tests and also by standards. So this is another good view for that learner profile. I just went back into their profile and clicked on benchmark tests and used the filter by standard. And now I can see what their standards they've been covered on that benchmark test and what their last score groups were. So I can kind of quickly just look at the colors to give me a good idea of where we're at. All right. So very easy on any of these pages to just click on the create PDF if you want to print. So Julia mentioned in the questions that Schoolnet has been slow for her. So if this has been happening, it sounds like you've tried at multiple locations, then I would each public school unit has a Schoolnet rep that can submit support tickets. And so I would encourage you to contact your Schoolnet admin for your public school unit and see if there's anything going on with the network, but it probably sounds like since you tried it in different places that maybe they need to file a ticket so we can look into it. Schoolnet, I'm in the training site, which is on a slightly different server, so sometimes it can be a little bit slower than production, but production shouldn't be, it shouldn't be slow enough to be detrimental. Now, if you're loading, 50 or 100 assessment items to look at one time, then keep in mind it may take a minute or two to load, but not. Um, So Nidhi was asking about math tests in Spanish. We do have, in the Certica item bank, we do have Spanish items. So you would be able to build a test with Spanish items using the Certica item bank. You can do a filter by question language just to see the Spanish items. And then Madeline was talking about would the item analysis be a good resource to review for final exams? Absolutely. I think item analysis on some of the prior tests would be a great way for students to look. So if, again, I've just clicked on, benchmark tests and I've filtered by standards, and then I can drill down. So maybe I really want to look at this earth and environmental standard for this particular student. And it kind of gives me a summary of how many tests they've taken. So they've taken 7 tests this year in earth and environmental science, and it's kind of giving me a breakdown on where the student is. And if I click on any one of these items, it's going to bring up the individual item analysis report for that particular standard. So very, detailed snapshot here, but again, this is only if you give assessments in Schoolnet, right? This benchmark test and classroom test tab only populates if you give tests in Schoolnet, right? So if your school doesn't use Schoolnet very often, you're not going to have very much data here. But hopefully that's going to change after tonight if you don't already use Schoolnet on a regular basis. All right. So we've spent a lot of time looking at kind of the student profile, the different reports in Schoolnet that could be available as a teacher. I want to spend some time looking at it now from the student perspective because as we talked about when we're talking about a learner profile, it is important to get that student perspective and also their agency, especially if you have older students. You really want them to be taking the reins and knowing where they are academically and being able to explain the things that they are strong and the things that they have opportunities for growth. So we're going to talk a little bit about what Schoolnet looks like from the student side. And while I'm logging in as a student, if you could just tell me in the questions, do your students look at the reports in Schoolnet for after they've completed an assessment, or do they just look at their grades in PowerSchool? So that's just a food for thought while I log out here and log in as a student. All right. So I'm going to go in here and I'm going to see if anybody. All right, so Madeline shared that that some of our students go back to look at the test questions. They want to know what they got wrong. And Patricia asked, yes, you do have access to the training site. So if this is something that you want to be able to use to show other teachers or to train on, you can get logins from your Schoolnet admin for your PSU. So Every PSU has specific logins for the training site. All right, so I've logged in as a student. So mostly what our students are trained to kind of do is they go in here and they enter the passcode and they click go and they start a test. But there's actually two areas where they can look at tests. So they can go under this student profile and then they can also look at the latest scored tests. So I'm going to look at this Math 1 final exam. So let's go in and click review. And now this Math 1 final exam, the teacher has hidden the questions to preserve test security, all right, since this is a final exam. So what I see is I basically see the questions, the question numbers, and I see if I got it correct or incorrect, and I see what type of question it is. I don't see the actual question and answer choices. I still can go in, though, through my standards review and look and see how I did based on standards. So as a student, I could go in here, even though I can't see those individual questions, I could still go in here and I could see which questions are aligned to the standard and which ones I got correct and incorrect. All right, so looking at this from a student perspective with a learner profile, students could definitely come in here and look at their tests and look at their standards and kind of see where they are, see which standards they need to do further review and kind of build some of those academic goals. So I don't want you to think that a learner profile is something that you do and you keep up. It might be something that you spend some time initially to get updated and get the basic information, whether you use Schoolnet or another source for your data, but really the students have agency in going in here and looking at the tests. All right, so I'm going to go in here and look at another one because I want to show you the difference between when it looks like. So let's go into a different subject area. All right, and now you see that the questions are available, right? You saw that those question numbers were actually. Whereas before it had a message up here that it was hidden due to security. Now, as a student, I can actually go in and look at this common assessment. I can see each question, I can see the standards, and I can see the correct answer and my answer, right? So I can go through and look at that particular test in detail. So Madeline was asking a question about they're not item bank questions for my courses, and that's true. We have item banks for most of the core areas, so ELA, math, science, social studies for grades 3 through 12, and we have a lot of math and ELA items for, and also some science. We had a fair amount of science for K2. But then, outside of that, we don't have a lot of item banks already populated. We do for CTE items. Those are the other enhancement or elective areas that we have items already made for. So when you build your own items, Schoolnet, you are required to align them to a standard, and there's a drop-down box that has all the standards. So you would just go in and pick your standards document. So for example, if you taught, 7th grade art or something like that, you could go in there and find the visual arts standards and then be able to align the questions to that. All right. So Nydia had a question about PowerSchool. So grades. So that's kind of a little bit outside of our webinar, but I will answer that question towards the end. So give me just a few minutes about that and I'll come back to that one. All right, so I do want to look at an example. So now that we've kind of looked at some of these reports and we've looked at what the students see, I wanted you to take a second, and I'm jumping to slide 16 if you're following along with me in the slide deck. And there is a article. mm, There we go. That talks about analyzing assessments with item analysis. And I just wanted to give you a second to look at this article. And I'm going to put the link in the chat. So if you're not on the spreadsheet, you can, or not on the slide deck, you can see that. And I just want to use the question feature to talk about, after you have a second to read this article, to think about how this could be done with Schoolnet. So some things I really like about this article is that it talks about, it has, what the student does, what the teacher does, and what technology does, right? So we're talking about, a student taking a pretest before you start a new unit of study. And then they look through their item analysis to determine, where they are with that pretest, with the standards. And then the teacher can adjust their instruction based on what they have already shown or demonstrated that they have an understanding of, right? So, don't let some of the wording in this article get to you about, learner pathways that may or may not be familiar to you. But I think this is just, basically talking about good teaching and learning, right? If we give a student a pretest and they already show mastery of certain standards or understanding, then we can go ahead and let them explore that standard to a deeper level, right? Or adjust what their instruction is. All right, and so I'm going to share what Patty had. Patty shared with us that this is the basis for Schoolnet. Schoolnet could assign a test as a pretest. Using all the report features of Schoolnet can drive the instruction towards standards in which students need the most help. Absolutely. And I think one thing I really like about this, there's a video on this site as well if you want to look at it, but really it's the students driving their learning, right? So, uh, the students should be working just as hard as you do, with all the hours that you put in and, doing things like coming to these webinars at night. Students should be, having that same discovery of their learning and understanding where they are academically and where they need to go. So it doesn't happen overnight, but I think with Schoolnet, it does provide that foundation for being able to build a pretest, give it to your students, and then let them look at the item analysis and look at where they are with standards and determine where they need to go. Which standards do they need to go deeper? Which standards do they need to go back and maybe look at some prerequisite skills? So some really nice understanding of where your students are and where they could be. I love the learner agency in this because it's definitely student driven. All right. So Julia had a question about the teacher notes communication concerns the learning on the learner profile, or excuse me, on the student profile, going through the communication logs and the learner. So she was asking if exists on Schoolnet, why would a district use a different platform? And there's a lot of reasons for that. So I guess it just depends on, does your district use Schoolnet often? Because like I said, it is an underutilized feature, that learning plan and notes section on a student profile. And so I think some districts just don't know it's there. So it could be that, or it could be the fact. Also, I'm not sure. I'm not familiar with the product that you mentioned that your district uses, but it could be that maybe that platform syncs to the EC system, or somehow connects to maybe MTSS in your district, and so they've chosen to use that. So there's a few different things. So go ahead and get your questions, keep them coming in, your thoughts, and I'm going to jump back over into as a teacher so I can show Nydia a little bit about the grade passback. So. And Julia, you are absolutely right. It is a lot. Um, it's a lot. It's a lot for you as a teacher. It's a lot for and coming from an administrator standpoint. It's a lot from even a student standpoint. So thinking about how we can streamline and accomplish the same goals with fewer steps, I think, is something we can all reflect on. So hopefully you can share those viewpoints now that you have a little bit more of an understanding about Schoolnet. All right, so I'm back here as a teacher, and so I'm in the training site. So in the training site, I don't have like an instance of PowerSchool hooked up where I can send grades, but there's a few different places that as a teacher I can send grades. So first of all, when I create a test, if I, when I create a test and I schedule it, there'll be a box to check that says send grades to Power Teacher gradebook. All right, it's very simple. You check that box. It asks you which category in your gradebook you'd like the test results to be set up as a new assignment. So, if you want it as a quiz or homework or whatever your categories are that you have in your gradebook. But if you forget to do that, you can always go into your test and you can go into your tests going over to the assessment dashboard, right? So the assessment dashboard is where all of your tests live, right? And so I can go in to that test, and when I click on it and open up the test details, there is a little box that says gradebook status, and it would be one of these boxes right here. It would say gradebook status, and you could say send, right? So there's a couple of different places. So if you forget when you are scheduling the test to send the grades to your Power Teacher Pro gradebook, there's a little box over here on the test details page that says send grades, and you can do that. So there's a couple of different ways. So there's nothing you have to set up. It's already been set up for you. PowerSchool and Schoolnet talk to each other on a regular basis every night. So you just have to go into your test details page and send the grades. There's also a gradebook status on your homepage for that test. So I don't see it here because I'm in the training site, but there should be a little button over here too to send the grades here. So several different locations to do that. So we had a question about the planner. So you'll notice there's a calendar on your homepage. Schoolnet does have a built-in lesson planner. So if I go under the classroom module on the left side, there's a lesson planner where I can add different assignments, I can upload files. I can look for the instructional materials that are in Schoolnet and actually add them to this lesson planner. The nice thing is that by doing that, the administrators in my school would be able to see my lesson planner, right? So I can go in here and you can look and schedule materials, right? And so you can look through here. So let's say I was looking for um, social studies, right? And so, uh, uh, and again, I'm in the training site, so there's not as many materials loaded. So let's just look. It might be my multiple grades that's giving me issues, but yeah. But basically, you can go in and search through the instructional materials in Schoolnet right here on your lesson planner. So we have a built-in lesson planner in Schoolnet. All right, we've got about 5 minutes left. And I do want to go over just a couple of resources. So hopefully you've got some ideas for, how to build a learner profile. What is a learner profile? Some ideas to explore. There's definitely no wrong way to do a learner profile. So I would encourage you just to start small and think about, what things are in Schoolnet or things that you can easily pull sources of information for a basic thing, and then what questions you can ask your students. Maybe do a quick little Google form with them to ask them some questions, and then you could use the responses from the Google form to help build their learner profiles as well, and then have some time for them to kind of plan and reflect on some goals. We do have a Google site that I post resources to. We have a YouTube channel. Also on the Google site is a link to our recordings of all of our webinars. So tonight's webinar doesn't really talk about how to use Schoolnet. It's kind of, we're starting to get into some more advanced concepts. So if you are new to Schoolnet and you want kind of that more foundational knowledge, I encourage you to go and look at our webinars from earlier in the year. We had some really good getting started webinars about how to use Schoolnet. And then we have our webinar schedule. So we do have more webinars coming up every month. So I look forward to seeing you hopefully again. And here's my contact information if you need it. And like I said, I will be in touch within the next 5 business days with your email with your CEU certificate, as well as a link to the recording and a copy of the slide deck. All right. I hope you all have a great night, and I will talk to you soon.